Thank you very, very much, and thank you all for being here today. In February of this year, I was diagnosed with a tumor in my head. The good news is it's almost certainly benign. It's also very small. And on the off chance that my daily meditations and affirmations don't stop it in its tracks, its growth is likely to be very slow. This new addition to my life has made its presence known in a variety of ways. For example, I've permanently lost all hearing in my right ear. I've also had to teach myself how to walk again. And while most of my symptoms have markedly improved, I still have an array of cognitive challenges. Fittingly, I suppose, this experience has led to a number of revelations. Chief among them is that understanding compassion is a journey, not a destination. I remember thinking otherwise when I started my career in the helping profession more than 30 years ago. Equipped with a degree in psychology and a healthy dose of empathy, I landed a job working with adolescents at a residential treatment facility. If my first few weeks were any indication, I seemed well suited for the task. But then one evening, a 14-year-old client of mine came storming through the door after a weekend visit with her mother and sister. The fire in her eyes did little to mask her pain. And within seconds, she broke down in tears and told me that her mother had decided to keep her 15-year-old sister, but was disowning her. For the next 4 hours, she alternated between grief and rage. To this day, I have never seen anyone as inconsolable. All I could do was listen to her in a way that I hoped would convey how much I cared about her, and that there was nothing she could say or do that would scare me away. And while I'll never know how her life ultimately played out, I do remember the hug she gave me when at the age of 16, she was finally welcomed into the home of a loving foster family. Several years later, my understanding of compassion grew once more after I saw a photograph that changed my life forever. Like many of you, I had seen pictures of animals suffering before. But this picture was different. In fact, it was unlike any image I had ever seen. What I saw before me was a tiny rhesus monkey who looked to be sitting in what I can only describe as some kind of electric chair. When I first looked at him, I didn't even notice that his hands and feet were shackled to the chair. Nor did I recognize that he had 2 electrodes embedded into the top of his skull. The only thing I saw, the only thing I truly recognized, was the expression on his face and the look in his eyes. And what I saw was hopelessness. And I had never stopped to imagine how it would feel to be all alone and completely without hope. A number of questions went through my mind that night, none of which I had answers for. But there was one thing I was certain of. I knew that I needed to save that picture, because I knew not only did I want to understand why the circumstances were happening in front of me that he was in, but I also wanted to understand what was causing this powerful emotional reaction I was having. So I cut the picture and the article out of the paper and I put it in a folder on my desk. And as I turned around to walk away, I noticed that I hadn't placed the picture neatly under the cover. And so as a result, his face seemed to be still looking back at me. And so instinctively, I turned around to cover the picture up. But before I did so, I stopped. And what I remember thinking was, if I straighten that picture out and cover it up, there's an extremely good chance I will never look at it again. Because very often, when we come across information that is extremely upsetting to us, we have a tendency to either literally or figuratively cover that information up. And I didn't want that to happen to me. So I left his picture the way it was, with his face still visible from beneath the cover. Later that night, I walked by my desk and I saw his face again, as I did the following morning, and as I continued to do for days on end, each time feeling very, very sad and very, very helpless. But then one morning I woke up and I felt something different. It was as though some kind of shift had happened inside of me. And this time, when I looked at his picture, I not only felt the empathy that I'd been experiencing for all these weeks, I also recognized his pain and suffering, but felt an overwhelming desire to do something about it. And so the next day, I went to the library determined to learn everything I could about animal experimentation. And by the end of the day, I had read quite a bit about the topic, but I'd also read a number of articles about topics I had never before seen as related. I found myself reading about hunting and fishing, circuses and zoos, about the animals killed in the meat and dairy and clothing industries. And it suddenly occurred to me that I had lived the first 30 years of my life making decisions each day that had either markedly altered or, in many instances, ended the lives of innocent animals. And I didn't want to do that anymore. I no longer wanted to bring items or experiences into my life that came to me at the expense of others. And so as I walked home that day, I made 2 lifelong promises to myself. The first was to become vegan. The second was to work for animal liberation. And so for the next 15 years, I divided my time between social work and animal advocacy. Regarding the latter, it became my custom to end all of my presentations with the following Buddhist poem. All beings tremble before violence. All love life and all fear death. See yourself in others. Then who can you hurt? What harm can you do? See yourself in others. Concise, profound, and seemingly easy to understand and to put into practice. Or so I thought. I was living just outside of Washington, D.C. in the fall of 2002 when the Beltway snipers began their first shooting, which was a 3-week reign of terror. They killed 10 people in 21 days. The first 6 of them were shot in less than 24 hours, all within close proximity of my home. It was the closest thing I'd ever been to a war zone, with fear being the dominant feeling. And like millions of others in the region, I mourned the senseless loss of life and was desperate for the rampage to end. And then one night after yet another shooting, I found myself thinking about the people responsible for these crimes. And I asked myself, what kind of pain must they be feeling in order to commit these murders? How tortured must their souls be? And as I reflected upon those questions, I realized I had never extended compassion to those who had done the unthinkable. And in truth, I realized that I had been guilty of selective compassion. And so before going to bed, I decided to do something I never thought I would: meditate on behalf of the shooters. And while far be it from me to draw a connection, the killing spree came to an end 2 days later. In the decade that followed, I continued to promote the principles of nonviolence and compassion, confident that I had developed a fairly sophisticated understanding of both. And little did I know, I still had more to learn. It was December of 2012, and I had told all my friends that I was the fittest I had ever been. 4 weeks later, I was on my way to the emergency room, wondering if I was going to survive. I did, of course, but a month would pass before I was able to do anything at all on my own. It was as if I had aged 40 years overnight. During that time, I grieved what felt like my own death, and I worried that I might not be able to regain any of my previous capabilities. However, with the encouragement of friends and loved ones, I embarked on a self-taught rehabilitation program. And while my physical strength did improve, something of greater magnitude caught my attention, beginning with my first independent walk outside my home. Barely able to stand, I staggered down the road, my body lurching awkwardly from side to side. As I approached an intersection, I noticed a woman in a motorized wheelchair. She was waiting for the light to change. Though she was unable to communicate, we greeted each other. And when I asked her if she was prepared for the light rain that had started to fall, she smiled and nodded. As I watched her ready herself to cross the street, I thought about friends, family members, and former clients of mine who had faced enormous physical and emotional challenges. And while I truly believed that I had understood how those hurdles had affected them, it occurred to me that maybe because I had always played the role of a caregiver, or had enjoyed the benefits of what many called a freakishly healthy lifestyle, I'd always felt something of a distance between myself and them. Yet in that moment, a moment I shared with someone whom I had just met and likely would never see again, that distance seemed to melt away. Though she and I had taken very different paths in life, I couldn't help feeling that we shared what I now refer to as a kinship of vulnerability and resilience. And it wasn't just her I felt connected to in this way. Images of loved ones passed through my mind in rapid succession. I thought about the courage my former mentor Stan Sapone showed during the final years of his life, his body deteriorating before his very eyes. I thought about the dignity my Aunt Dorothy displayed during her final weeks, even while confessing to me her fear of dying. And I thought about the strength my cousin Jay's wife and family showed in the face of unimaginable grief following his premature death. And in the weeks that followed, this newfound level of compassion and connection continued to expand in a way that I could have never imagined. I began to view everyone, be they friends, family, even strangers, through this new lens of shared vulnerability and resilience. Ever cognizant of the fact that in many instances, their physical and emotional challenges remained invisible to me, just as mine might be invisible to you. These days, I'd probably stop short of saying I'm glad to be facing my physical and emotional challenges. But I will say, without equivocation, that I'm extremely thankful for the lessons I have learned as a result. And while I'm certain I still have much more to learn about the meaning of compassion, I'm grateful for the opportunities I have each day to see myself in others. Thank you.